This video is sponsored by NordVPN. You might look at the current Pixel lineup and wonder what's changed in the last year or so, but push back far enough and you come across an absolute oddity that launched in a bizarre time, shipped with a strange spec sheet, and confused a lot of people. This little Pixel is one strange smartphone, and there's a bit more to it than just simply calling it unfit for purpose. So let's talk about perhaps the strangest Pixel Google ever made. Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas, and the Pixel line was a bit of a departure from the Nexus. It was a statement of intent that Google was here to compete with the big dogs. The original trilogy was a story of refinement, but very much sticking to the game plan. High-end devices that don't necessarily blow you away with the hardware, though they were certainly very good in that aspect, and a focus on that Pixel experience. They never sold crazy amounts, but the hype was there, and as someone who used all three, I have to say they felt like something quite special. The Pixel 4, perhaps deserving of its own video, was a strange one to say the least. Still a high-end device, but this time with no fingerprint scanner, a radar-based face unlock and gesture system, and a very high price. It felt strange, but nothing could have prepared us for what Google would announce in late 2020. The company delivered what can only be described as a tech oddity, a petite and slick Android smartphone made of 100% recycled aluminium on the back and Gorilla Glass 6 up front. When I call this smartphone small, I don't just mean in its footprint compared to the sorts of devices that we're used to in 2025. It's slick, it doesn't have much of a camera bump whatsoever. The sides and the back all feel really nice to hold, and it's 25% lighter than a Pixel 9 Pro, and that is something you absolutely feel. It's refreshing to hold now, but that was not necessarily the initial response to the Pixel 5. One of the most convenient and handy inventions of the last few years is certainly a VPN, and that's where this video's sponsor NordVPN comes in. Not only does this service help you browse anonymously, tunneling your network traffic through another region which helps secure your connection, but it's also just really handy for watching programs, movies and sports that you just wouldn't get in your home version of Netflix, for example. Or if, like me, you're a die-hard Premier League fanatic and you go on holiday, being able to log into your streaming services just as you normally would without a fuss is brilliant, and NordVPN allows you to do that. It works on Mac, Windows, iOS and our beloved Android. It's easy to install and get set up. If you go to nordvpn.com/ap, you'll get up to 77% off a 2-year plan and 3 months extra. So check that link out in the video description, and a big thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring today's content. In a big turn of events, Google decided to power its flagship product, its big ticket Pixel, with a decidedly mid-range system on chip. The Snapdragon 765G 5G, incredible name I have to say, was a pretty good setup, but certainly not the rapid chipset that we were used to in the previous model. And combined with 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage, which is the only SKU available, it was certainly not setting the world alight in its numbers. For the spec heads, for the enthusiasts, this was a big blow, considering the Pixel just the year before could run rings around it from a raw horsepower standpoint. And perhaps this was to cement the fact that Google's phones were made for software, not for hardware. Actually, hardware chief Rick Osterloh came out and explained that with the pandemic having hit that year, the world didn't need another $1,000 smartphone, explaining that whilst they didn't anticipate the outbreak, they did think the world was headed for an economic downturn, suggesting that this Pixel was almost the people's phone compared to the 4-figure flagships. Now, however much you want to read into that and believe it is entirely up to you, but it was essentially trying to explain away the switch to the mid-range chipset from last year's high-end 855. What did impress people though was Google's decision to backtrack on the largely unuseful 2x telephoto camera inclusion from the Pixel 4 and replace it with a much anticipated ultra-wide camera for capturing just a wider field of view. The same main camera sensor that had been in the previous 3 Pixels, but now with a 16 megapixel wide field of view camera in a package that barely protruded from the back of the already very thin phone. In typical Google fashion, the software processing did a phenomenal job at carrying this hardware and making a mid-range phone take some of the best photos of any model on the market at the time. It's always wild to me just how good Pixel photos look years after their releases, and the Pixel 5 is just no exception to that rule. Despite the fact that we have sensors double the size today and quadruple the resolution in the modern Pixel phones, the photos from the 5 still look brilliant, especially when you give it enough light. Outside of great lighting conditions, yes, it can fall apart a little bit, but that's only really on the surface, and once you remember that this phone was discontinued 4 years ago, it all starts to make a bit more sense. Something that Google introduced with the original Pixel unfortunately ended with the Pixel 5. It was the last Pixel to ship with unlimited high resolution storage for Google Photos, a feature that got a lot of Pixel users on the Pixel to start with, and something that some people ended up buying the phone for in the first place. Having just the 128GB SKU with no expandable storage was dampened by the fact that you had unlimited backups. It's a real shame we don't have that in the current Pixels without paying top dollar anyway. The phone shipped with Android 11 and was supported to Android 14, so only lost support a couple of years ago. Of course, the 5 was long before Google started offering crazy long software support for its models. But the software, of course, was the focus, given the cutback hardware. It was clean, it was still quite ahead of One UI at this time in terms of update rollouts, software features, and in my opinion also the design. Since, Samsung has managed to pull it back, and I do think One UI is a real contender for Pixel experience, but that was not the case with the Pixel 5. It's strange to think about these days if you weren't there, but the Pixel 5 really wasn't all that popular when you consider the Pixel has become quite relevant in pop culture, appearing in Formula 1, the NBA, the Premier League. The Pixel has evolved and morphed a lot down the years, and of course straight after the 5, Google would move its Pixel onto the Tensor era, now powered by its own processors. Not that these have a particular reputation for speed in the first place compared to the Pixel 5, but the visor has become iconic, and the phones actually are popular now, probably mostly helped by the AI and software inclusions, and they're particularly popular in places like the UK and Japan. The Pixel 5 launched at a very inopportune time for the world, released with specs that didn't appeal to enthusiasts and without the hype and marketing to really establish itself into the mainstream. It almost gets forgotten because it was the one before Tensor. It never really set the world alight, and yet picking it up in 2025 reminds me of early Pixel. The charm around the build, the clean, almost desolate software by today's AI-filled standards, and a stark reminder that you should never really underestimate the timeless quality that the Pixel camera delivers, even one that on paper would barely make a selfie camera these days. Google's tech oddity, the Pixel 5, will probably be missed in smartphone history discussions, a sort of if you know you know type situation. Is that fair? Or should it be praised for more what it could do and not lamented for what it couldn't? Guys, let me know your thoughts on the Pixel 5. Did you have one of these back in the day? I really wanted one because this sage green color is just, well, it's phenomenal, isn't it? And if you did have one of these, were you one of the few that absolutely loved it, or were you instead on the camp that, well, just didn't find it good enough, at least compared to the previous Pixels? And if you had one, did you stick with Pixel? Have you upgraded to the Tensor era, or did it just put you off and you've never been back since? Anyway, whilst you're down there in the comments, please hit like if you enjoyed today's video, and of course, subscribe to never miss another upload on this channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I've been Ryan Thomas, and I'll catch you later. Cheers.